Ayotte from New Hampshire was integrally involved, and let me just turn to Senator Ayotte and from the perspective of the people of New Hampshire, where do you think we are with respect to a detainee policy in this country today?
Thank you, Senator Chambliss. I would say this, you highlighted the importance, number one, and as did Senator McCain, of passing the defense authorization. I've been to the floor twice on this issue because I think it's so important for our country. The notion that it's been half a century since we have failed to pass this authorization, what is at stake for our troops and for the troops and the message that it sends to them. We still are at war, in 2 wars. There are threats that face our country every day, and our military men and women, we owe it to them that they know that we're going to pass this authorization to address issues like pay increases and issues like weapons that they need and all of the fundamental day-to-day issues to make sure that they know that we're behind them. But this issue of the detainee policy of this country, I would summarize over the last few months in the Armed Services Committee, military leader after military leader has come before our committee, and we've asked them about this issue of how do we treat detainees. And I questioned General Carter Ham, the commander of Africa Command, about what we would do if we captured a member of al-Qaeda in Africa. And you know what he said? He said he would need some, quote, lawyerly help to answer that one. Is that what we've come to? Our commanders need lawyerly help in order to know how to deal with captured terrorists and how to treat them within our system to make sure that we have a secure place to gather intelligence from them and to ensure that the American people and our allies are protected. This detainee compromise that the majority leader is holding up the entire authorization bill for was an overwhelmingly bipartisan compromise. This provision in the committee was voted 25-1 in support of this because there is such a need to address how we treat detainees. And as Senator Chambliss already highlighted, we have a 27% recidivism rate from those who have been released from Guantanamo. Just a couple of examples of what those individuals are doing right now against us, our troops, and our allies. For example, the number 2 in al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula was someone we released from Guantanamo. Another top commander of the Taliban in the Quetta Shura is out planning attacks against us is someone that we released from Guantanamo. That's why this issue cries out for a detention policy for our country. This is a very important issue to be brought to the floor along with the entire authorization. And I see my colleague from South Carolina here, Senator Graham, who I know has worked very closely on these detention issues as a JAG attorney and someone who has visited Afghanistan just in August. And I would ask him to, have you ever seen, first of all, in your time in the Senate, us acting like this with respect to the defense authorization, the Senate in this way? And second, how important do you think it is that we address this detainee issue?
Could I just say I thank the senator from New Hampshire and the enormous contribution she's made in putting together this legislation. And I'd also like both of you and my friend from South Carolina, in the letter to address this issue, in the letter that Senator Reid, Majority Leader, I'd ask my colleague, sent to Senator Levin and me, he used as the rationale for not bringing the bill to the floor, he says, I do not intend to bring this bill to the floor until concerns regarding the bill's detainee provisions are resolved. And it goes on, and then he says, as Deputy National Security Advisor John Brennan stated in a recent speech, he said, this approach, talking about the approach that we have taken in the bill by, I believe the vote was 25-1, he said this approach would impose unprecedented restrictions on the ability of experienced professionals to combat terrorism, injecting legal and operational uncertainty into what is already enormously complicated work. I wonder if the senator from South Carolina, does Mr. Brennan understand what's in the legislation?
Well, thank the senator from Arizona, and all of my colleagues for working on what is a very difficult subject matter, but when 25-1 becomes the outcome, that's pretty good. And I don't know what this is not Harry Reid, quite frankly. I like Senator Reid. He's signing the letter. This goes back to the White House. This is President Obama's team. This is not Harry Reid. This is not the Senate holding up this bill. It's the White House holding up this bill because they have an irrational view of what we need to be doing with detainees. They've lost the argument, and I tried to help to close Guantanamo Bay. It's not going to close. We're not going to move those prisoners inside the United States. The Congress has said no. The American people have said no. And the reason we've lost that argument is after working with the White House for about a year and a half to try to find a national security-centric detainee policy that would assure the American people that we're not going to let these people roam around the world and treat them as common criminals, they could never pull the trigger on the hard stuff. We're here because the White House cannot tell the ACLU no. There are 48 people at Guantanamo Bay being held under the law of war who will never see a courtroom, military or civilian courtroom, and that's part of military law. You don't have to let an enemy prisoner go. Most enemy prisoners are never prosecuted. And they're being held down at Guantanamo Bay under the law of war. An executive order issued by the Obama administration gives them an annual review. We've been trying to work with the Obama administration for a couple of years now to create a statutory scheme to deal with every class of detainee that we may run into in this war that will go well beyond my lifetime. And the reason that Mr. Brennan objects is because there's a decision made by the Congress to say that if a detainee is captured and interrogated by the high-value interrogation team, which I like, which is an interagency combination of the CIA, the FBI, military, and other law enforcement agencies to make sure we get the best intelligence possible, that we create a presumption for military custody. And the reason we're doing that is because the Obama administration has been hell-bent on criminalizing this war. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, the mastermind of 9/11, had charges preferred against him in military commissions during the Bush administration, and he was ready to go to trial, literally ready to plead guilty. The Obama administration withdraws those charges and was going to put him in New York City, giving Khalid Sheikh Mohammed the same constitutional rights as an American citizen, take that show on the road from Guantanamo Bay and have a trial in the heart of New York City that would cost $300 million alone for security. That blew up in their face. You just don't get it. Most Americans don't see these people as some guy that robbed a car. Stole a car or robbed a liquor store. Most Americans see the detainees that we're capturing on the battlefield throughout the whole world as a genuine threat to this country. And I applaud the Obama administration for taking the fight to the terrorists, for going after bin Laden, for using Predator drones on the battlefield all over Afghanistan and Pakistan. What I fault them with is that we have no way of capturing someone and acquiring good intelligence because you've locked the system down. And this detainee legislation that we have before the Senate will allow a way to go forward. What happens if you capture someone tomorrow? Where do we put them? What jail do we have as a nation to put a captured terrorist in? We don't have a jail because they won't use Guantanamo Bay. They captured a terrorist and put him on a ship for 60 days. The Navy is not in the detention business. We don't build ships to make them jails. We build ships to fight wars. So this aversion to using Guantanamo Bay is going to bite us as a nation. So this legislation allows us to move forward. If you capture someone, you can gather good intelligence. There's a presumption that they're going to be held as an enemy combatant, but there's a waiver provision there. What I don't want to do is start reading rights to everybody we capture in the United States as part of a terrorist organization's plot. We're not fighting a crime, we're fighting a war, and under the rules of war, you can hold an enemy combatant and interrogate them as long as necessary to find out what the enemy's up to. That's what this legislation does to my colleagues. You've written a very balanced approach. And this idea of never using Guantanamo Bay again is dangerous. The idea that the CIA cannot interrogate enemy prisoners as a policy is dangerous. By executive order, the President of the United States, President Obama, within a week of taking office, took off the table enhanced interrogation techniques under the Detainee Treatment Act that were classified, that were not waterboarding within our values, but there were techniques available to our intelligence community, Senator Chambliss overseas, that will allow them over time to acquire good intelligence. And one of the reasons we captured bin Laden, killed bin Laden, is because of the intelligence picture we acquired over 10 years. But this president, within a week, said, by executive order, the only interrogation tool available to the United States of America is the Army Field Manual, which is online. You can go read it for yourself.
Can I ask my colleague, it's a fact, as Senator from New Hampshire pointed out, that 27% of the detainees that have been released from Guantanamo Bay have returned to the fight. Not only have they returned to the fight, the fact that they were in Guantanamo gives them an automatic kind of charisma and aura and leadership in al-Qaeda and other terrorist organizations. And do you think the American people find that acceptable, that 1 out of every 4 that we have released from Guantanamo Bay have re-entered the fight and clearly are responsible for the deaths at least of some brave young Americans and may be responsible for the deaths in the future of Americans?
Not only, I think most Americans are upset by that, but they're worried about what comes down the road. And that's what I'm worried about. The Senate legislation is trying to create a pathway forward for the future. What do you do with these people we have at Guantanamo Bay that may never go on trial? What do you do with these people at Guantanamo Bay who come from countries, if you returned them to that country, they'd be back in the fight by the end of the day?
As has happened in Yemen.
So we have a bipartisan proposal that will allow us as a nation to make rational decisions about detention. And the White House is holding it up. And there's provisions in this bill that affect the day-to-day lives of the men and women in our military. And the White House is saying detainee policy, driven by the ACLU, is more important to them than a bill that would allow the CIA the authorization they need to go fight this war, that would provide wounded warrior assistance at a time when wounded warriors need it the most. You talk about perverse view of things. You talk about having it wrong in terms of what's most important. Allowing the detainee issue to deny the CIA the authorization they need to protect us all is dangerous. To put the men and women's needs in uniform in terms of their health care, their pay, their ability to take care of their families, secondary to detainee policies that make no sense, driven by the far left in this country, is what this debate's about. Well, to the White House, we're not going to change this bill.
Would the Senator yield for a question?
Yes.
Then, am I correct, I would say to my friends from South Carolina and New Hampshire and Arizona, that because of the administration's opposition to a detainee treatment provision that was, I gather, approved overwhelmingly in the Armed Services Committee, we will for the first time deny everybody in the Senate an opportunity to offer any amendments on any subject to the DOD authorization bill, and in fact will not consider it on the floor of the Senate for the first time in 4 decades?
50 years.
The minority leader is absolutely right, but I would just add to my good friend from Kentucky, is even more, it's not just about us. What we're denying is General Petraeus, the new CIA director, authorization language he desperately needs to fight the war. What we're denying is men and women in uniform pay raises, health care benefits that they desperately need because of detention policy driven by, I think, the most liberal people in this country, and 25 out of 26 senators blessed this package. So, Senator McConnell, you're absolutely right. Not only does the Senate not have a say about what would be the way forward on detainees, the men and women in uniform and our CIA operatives out there taking the fight to the enemy do not have the tools they need because of one area of this legislation. And it would be a national tragedy if we could not pass this bill, which is sound to its core in all areas, because the ACLU doesn't like what we've done on detention.
Senator, if the minority leader would yield for a question, as you well know, the intelligence community depends upon the defense authorization bill for the authorization to operate in the intelligence community, and whether it's the budget or whether it's policy. All of that is compromised in the majority leader's refusal to bring this bill to the floor. And without the authorities in the respective intelligence bills that are passed by the House and by the Senate, then our Intelligence Committee is handicapped and hamstrung in policies that are needed as we move forward in this ever-changing war on terrorism. And I would ask the senator from Kentucky if he has ever, in his long experience in the Senate, ever seen any bill of this nature held up and not allowed to come to the floor because of any single senator's refusal to accept the provisions that are in the bill by an overwhelming vote like this.
Mr. President, I'm not sure who has the floor, but I would just say in response to my friend from Georgia,
Could I say, Senator, we have unanimous consent for a colloquy.
There may have been examples, but I'm hard-pressed to think of one recently. And the tradition of passing the defense authorization bill is there for good reason. The national defense of the United States is the most important thing the federal government does. And the committee upon which the senator from Georgia and the senator from Arizona and the senator from New Hampshire serve are the experts on this matter, and I find this truly astonishing. It's consistent, however, I must say, with the pattern around here in recent times. No amendments, fill up the tree, deny the majority and the minority in this case, both the majority and the minority, the opportunity to have any input on a piece of legislation that determines what we do on the federal government's most important responsibility. I think this is another example of the way the Senate has deteriorated into operating like the House, and it's extremely bad direction for this institution and for the American people.
I would just like to add as well that this detainee compromise, as Senator McCain and I have talked about before, is actually the group of individuals that we're talking about here are military custody for members of al-Qaeda or affiliated groups who are planning an attack against the United States or its coalition partners. And you think about that category of individuals, the most dangerous category of individuals that we have to address is why we came to the compromise in committee that the default would be military custody for those individuals. And it's inconsistent with the administration's position. If you think about it, they are, rightly so, and I agree with them, undertaking, taking out members of al-Qaeda around the world that fall under that category, that are out there killing Americans and plotting against Americans and our allies. Yet they're objecting to a provision, a detainee provision, that would give guidance to our military and intelligence leaders that those individuals should be treated in the first instance with military custody. Seems to me very inconsistent with what they have been doing in other contexts, and obviously this is a category of individuals on a bipartisan basis we agreed to on committee were the most dangerous category of individuals who should be held in the first instance in military custody. And I wanted to add that Mr. Brennan, whom the majority leader has cited on behalf of the administration as objecting to this provision, he doesn't seem to, in his speech to Harvard that he gave recently, appreciate who this provision applies to and that there is actually a national security waiver in the provision. So I would ask the administration and Mr. Brennan, again, to read the provisions that were passed on a bipartisan basis by the committee, because this is such a key issue to move forward to give guidance to our military. But I'm concerned that the administration's objections to this are misguided and they haven't read the actual legislation that we are working on here. So it is my hope, as the majority leader, as our leader, the minority leader, has said, that we will move forward with passing the critical pieces for our troops, because our troops deserve nothing less than for us to bring this forward to the floor because of the pay raises in there, the weapon systems that they deserve to have, everything that is in that bill. But also I would ask the administration to revisit its position because it seems inconsistent with its own policies, and they don't seem to have actually read the compromise that was overwhelmingly passed out of the Armed Services Committee.
I thank the senator from New Hampshire, and I know that we have addressed this issue in some depth, but I would remind my colleagues, this is the defense authorization bill. This is the product of thousands of hours of work, of staff work, hundreds of hours of testimony and hearings, a week-long markup of the full committee putting this package together. The thoughts, the ideas, the recommendations of the administration, people in and out of the administration, the knowledge and expertise of thousands of individuals goes into this most important piece of legislation that for 50 years has been taken up, debated, amended, passed, and signed into law by the President of the United States. Now, because of one small provision of this bill, the Majority Leader of the Senate, at the behest of the White House, has decided that we won't take up the defense authorization bill for the first time in 50 years. I think that the distinguished Republican leader and I, who have been around here for quite a while, have seen this process now deteriorate to the point where we now cannot debate, amend, and pass legislation that is so vital to our nation's security and the men and women who take part in preserving it. It's kind of a sad day for this member.
And just finally, I'd ask both the senator from Arizona, who's been our leader on national defense issues, and the senator from New Hampshire, is all the basis of this that the administration wants to establish the precedent that they can capture enemy non-combatants anywhere in the world and send them straight into the United States, into an Article III court. Is that the crux of this, I would ask my friends?
I would say to our distinguished Republican leader, I think that is what is at the heart of this, is that they want to treat these individuals in the context of our civilian court system. Otherwise, why would you object to a provision on military custody for those who are members of al-Qaeda who are planning an attack against the United States or have attacked the United States? Because, and there also, I would point out, there's a national security waiver in this provision. So the only thing I can take from it is that they do want to treat this war as really people who are at war with as civilians, as opposed to who they are, who are enemies of our country.
Could I ask the senator from New Hampshire, former Attorney General, a further question? Does this not lead inevitably in the direction of a mindset that would say, on the battlefield, you capture an enemy combatant, and that enemy combatant is inevitably on the way to an Article III court, could it lead to the feeling that that enemy combatant should be read as Miranda rights on the battlefield? If he isn't viewed as an individual who's on the way to a U.S. court under U.S. law, where does it end, I ask my friend from New Hampshire?
Well, I would say that's an absolute concern here, because this would be the first war in the history of our country where we would be treating those we capture on the battlefield, giving them the rights to our civilian court system. And that is where do we draw the line? It would be outrageous to require members of our military and intelligence officials to immediately ask, do I have to give Miranda rights? Do I have to give the same? Do I have to worry about some of the speedy trial and presentment issues that come from a civilian court system? And that's why in the guidance of the committee on a bipartisan basis was that this category of individuals, the presumption should be military custody, because these are individuals who are enemy combatants that we are at war at. And that's fundamentally what's at issue here. And it does seem inconsistent with what the administration is doing in treating these individuals in terms of rightly going after them around the world and killing them in certain instances, that we wouldn't provide them military custody in the first instance.
Could I also point out to my friend and my colleagues that, as is the case quite often with, even though the vote was 25-1 on this provision in the Senate Armed Services Committee, we did provide, at the request of the administration, a waiver for national security. So we included a waiver that says the Secretary of Defense may, in consultation with the Secretary of State, Director of National Intelligence, waive the requirements of the paragraph 1, that's the detainee issue, if the Secretary submits to Congress a certification in writing that such a waiver is in the national security interests of the United States. So there is a national security waiver. We have given the President of the United States a way that he could waive every provision of this legislation, something that I wasn't particularly happy about, but in the spirit of compromise we gave a waiver. And could I say also, I'm sure I see the majority leader on the floor, yes, there have been contentious times. There was contention last year about the Don't Ask, Don't Tell Act. The year before, there was contention about the fact that they added the hate crimes bill, which had nothing to do with national security, onto the bill. But at least we ought to go ahead and take up and debate and amend and have the Senate act as the American people expect us to, and that is consideration, voting, and the President, if it is that objectionable, obviously could veto the bill. But to just say because of these few pages, these pages right here of the bill, that therefore we won't even take up the bill for the first time in 50 years, in my view, is a great disservice to the men and women who are serving. I thank my friend, the Senator from New Hampshire, and the minority leader. I yield the floor.
Conversations with Senator McCain and Levin about the provisions that they've spent a lot of time on this morning. The discussions have been very positive, and hopefully these concerns can be resolved. Of course, if they can't be, the only way to resolve them would be here on the Senate floor. And I hope in the next several days we can work something out on this somewhat difficult provision that's in the bill reported out of the committee. Mr. President, first of all, let me say that my friends who came and spoke on the floor today, I understand their concern about the defense of this country. Anytime John McCain comes to the floor or comes any place in the world and talks about anything dealing with the security of this country, everyone should listen. He's a man we all know, we respect, we hold in the highest regard, not only because of his legislative skills, he's been a presidential nominee, but the fact is he's a certified American military hero. So I want everyone to understand that I have no problem at all with Senator McCain coming to the floor talking about something that he knows a lot about. But I do want to remind everyone that we are now in the 10th month of this Congress. And we have been blocked, obstructed, prevented, and held up from moving the legislation for 10 months. We've wasted months and months because of obstructionism, threats to shut down the government. Think back just a little while, Mr. President, on trying to get government funded until the 1st of October. I don't know at this stage how many votes we had, but at least a half a dozen, extending the government for a week, a few days, with the threat of government shutting down with every one of those extensions of the continuing resolution. Then we moved to a new stage in the history of our great country. That is extending the debt ceiling. At times in the past, it's been done routinely, hundreds of times, 18 times during the Reagan administration. But no, we took months to do it for President Obama. And that has prevented us from doing a lot of the routine work that we need to do here, including the Defense Authorization Bill. These items used to be routine under Democratic and Republican presidents. But this Congress, Republicans have turned even routine matters into crisis. Since the beginning of the year, they've blocked jobs bills using obstruction tactics. They've filibustered everything by amendment. Remember the Small Business Innovation Bill, Mr. President, a bill I like to talk about because it's been one of the best things that's happened to this country. Small business entrepreneurs, people who had ideas how to improve the economy, did good things with these small grants they got. My favorite, of course, is the electric toothbrush. But there were other things that have been done. But you know that bill, Mr. President, traditionally handled with minimal controversy, in fact, no controversy, always passes unanimously with help from both sides. Republicans amended this little piece of legislation so good for our country and creating jobs to death. The process took nearly 2 months. There was the Economic Development Revitalization Act, something that started during the time that Richard Nixon was president. We did this routinely, most every time by unanimous consent. A bill that creates lots and lots of jobs, employment for our country. The Republican senators blocked this bill, dragging out the process for months. Their obstructionism has cost this country millions of jobs, including 2 million who have been created by the American Jobs Act. And suddenly, they're calling for return to normal order, regular order they call it. Well, Mr. President, after 10 months of dragging out the most routine matters, preventing the normal order of business here in the Senate, suddenly they're calling for us to move quickly on the defense authorization bill, something that should have been done some time ago. And they're threatening to shut down the government if they don't get their way. We have coming up in less than a month another threat by the Republicans to shut down the government. That seems to be the mantra. If we don't get what we want, we'll close the government. This continuing resolution expires on November 18th, right before Thanksgiving. My colleagues are right about the Defense Authorization Act. Absolutely right. We need to do this. We've always done it, and we're going to do it this year. As I said to Senator McCain on a number of occasions, and Senator Levin, I'm eager to find a path to get this done. My colleagues have said several times they believe these provisions ought to be considered regular order, and the Senate ought to proceed to debate them. As I indicated a few minutes ago, if that's the only avenue we have, then that's what we'll do. The defense authorization bill is going to get done this year. But we've been held up for 10 months, Mr. President, in doing the ordinary process that this government is so required to do.
Senator, yield for a question.
I'd be happy to yield to my friend for a question.
I'd like to ask the Majority Leader, since I've listened to the colloquy by my Republican colleagues just a few moments ago, and it related to the detainee policy, which is one of the controversial issues in the defense authorization bill. I would ask the Majority Leader, I'm sure he's aware of the fact that last week in Detroit, in an Article III federal court, an accused terrorist, the so-called underwear bomber, pled guilty to terrorism, having gone through the regular criminal process in Article III courts, having been interrogated by the FBI, and even after Miranda warnings, surrendering very valuable information and intelligence to protect the United States. And is it not true that when we look at the record about detainees or those accused of terrorism being tried, we find that since 9/11, over 200 of them have been successfully tried in Article III courts under President Bush and President Obama, and under military commissions, exactly four terrorists have been tried, and that the argument on the other side that the Article III courts are incapable of protecting the United States and successfully prosecuting terrorists absolutely flies in the face of the facts. 200 terrorists convicted in Article III courts, 4 by military tribunals. You would think it was exactly the opposite from the arguments made on the floor by my friend from Arizona and others. I would ask the senator from Nevada, our Majority Leader, are we not trying to give to any president, this president and any president, the tools and the decision-making necessary to protect our nation, to pick the best place to investigate and to prosecute those who are accused of terrorism?
In response to my friend's question, he's absolutely right. And remember, this is not an Obama-driven program. It started during the George Bush era. Why? Because George Bush was President of the United States on 9/11, and he recognized the importance of doing this in a fashion that will maintain the civility of our criminal justice system. I say to my friend, there's some I want to make sure, and I repeat what I said earlier, no one is saying that we're not going to do the defense authorization bill. We're going to do that. But we are really, because of being jammed, as I've tried to outline here, to the entire country, and being able to get our work done here this last 10 months, we're trying to find time to do lots of things. That's why we've come up with this unique way of moving appropriation bills. We're doing them together, 3 at a time rather than 1 at a time, in an effort to do what I have been asked by the Speaker of the House to do. Do what you can to get these appropriation bills done. Senator McConnell suggests the same thing. We're doing our very, very best. But we have been held up from doing the ordinary business. I gave 2 examples, or about as good as you can give, of our trying to do things to create jobs in America today. And we've been stymied from doing that. So I say to everyone here, we have, I'm really somewhat at a loss for words for an organization here, the Republican caucus, who've done everything that they can do these past 10 months to stop us from moving forward. Remember, Mr. President, remember, my friend, the Republican leader's #1 goal, and I admire his candidacy. I admire his honesty. He said his #1 goal was and has been to defeat President Obama. And as a result of that, we have not been able to do the government's business, because everything that they can do to slow down government is something they believe will help them a year from now.
With the Senator yield for one more question.
Be happy to.
Is it not true the Majority Leader came to the floor yesterday on the pending legislation, the appropriations bills, and invited members from both sides to bring their amendments to the floor and call their amendments for a vote, that some 10 or 11 or more amendments have been filed and we are still waiting for that? Is it not true that we're giving this opportunity to our colleagues to offer their amendments and to call their amendments, and that is a way for those who are looking for their opportunity on the floor to express their point of view and get a vote?
I appreciate very much the senator from Illinois reminding me of what took place at the beginning of this Congress.
Yield for a comment from me.
As soon as I answer my friend's question.
Oh, sorry.
I'm reminded of what took place at the beginning of this year. We had a number of new senators, relatively new senators, who joined with some that had more experienced senators, who wanted to change the way they saw our having done business in the last Congress. And I joined with my friend, the Republican leader, and said, let's just back off a little bit. And the Republican leader said, we're going to be very, very discreet in what we do with motions to proceed, to allow us to get on legislation. And I said, fine. If that's the case, then we'll make sure that we have the opportunity to offer amendments. That is broken down big time, I say to my friend, because it is a rare day here that we have been able to move to a piece of legislation without having to go through the process of filing cloture on just the ability to get on a bill. And we've had open amendments, as we did on the Small Business Innovation Bill, and guess what happened? It was amended to death. So after 2 months, we gave up. Couldn't do that bill that had been done routinely in the past. So I say to my friend, we're going to try it again. We got this appropriation bill. We're going to try to get it done. Amendments we're waiting for people to offer amendments, and we're going to try to move through this and get it done. We're going to do the appropriation bill this week. We have other things we need to do. This is an important time in the history of our country to show the American people we can work together. I hope that, in fact, is the case, because based on my experience from the beginning of this Congress, where there was supposed to be a good faith effort to return to regular order, it has not happened. I'd be happy to yield to my friend for a question.
Thank you. I just want to say to the Majority Leader, who I've known and been friends with for many years, I thank him for his kind remarks, and I'm very appreciative of his comments of the commitment of bringing the defense authorization bill to the floor. I thank the Majority Leader. Mr. President.
Arizona.
Oh, after the bill. Okay.
Morning business is closed on the previous order. The Senate resume consideration of H.R. 2112, which clerk will report.
Calendar number 155, H.R. 2112, an act making appropriations for agriculture, rural development, Food and Drug Administration, and related agencies' programs for the fiscal year ending September 30th, 2012, and for other purposes.
Mr. President,
Senator from Arizona.
I ask unanimous consent to temporarily set aside the pending amendment for purposes of calling up amendments.
Without objection.
I call up 3 amendments numbered 739, 740, and 741 and ask that they be reported by number.
Clerk will report.
Senator from Arizona, Mr. McCain, proposes amendments in block numbered 739, 740, 741 to amendment number 738.
Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President, I suggest the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
Senator from Texas.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd ask unanimous consent that the quorum call be rescinded.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. President, yesterday I introduced my amendment to the pending Commerce and Justice Appropriations Bill. And this amendment, I'd like to just explain briefly for my colleagues, this amendment is designed to basically cut off any future funds that might be made available under this appropriation bill to fund the Department of Justice's program, now notoriously known as Fast and Furious. This would prohibit the taxpayer funding of operations where federal law enforcement personnel knowingly cause the transfer of firearms to drug cartel agents and intentionally fail to monitor those weapons. On December 2014-2010, United States Border Patrol agent Brian Terry was gunned down on the southern border while attempting to apprehend members of a predatory criminal gang that operated in Arizona's Peck Canyon. A congressional investigation and several news reports have confirmed that some of those guns used in that attack actually came from gun dealers in the United States. And the guns were actually put in the hands of these agents of the cartels and allowed to cross the border with the full knowledge of officials associated with the United States government, most notably the Bureau of Alcohol and Tobacco Firearms and the U.S. Attorney's Office in Arizona, although it's unknown at this point how far up in the chain of command knowledge of this program went, but that's another story for another time. So the American people and their representatives of Congress have began asking after the death of Brian Terry what happened under this Fast and Furious program and who will be held accountable. Answers to those questions have been very slow in coming, and some have been contradictory. But the more questions that were raised, the more questions came up. One question is, of course, who authorized Fast and Furious and why? According to congressional investigations led on this side of the Capitol by Senator Grassley and on the other side of the Capitol by Congressman Darrell Issa, this Fast and Furious program began in 2009 in the Phoenix field office of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms under the direct supervision of the United States Attorney for the District of Arizona, and instructed Phoenix area firearms dealers to go through with sales of nearly 2,000 weapons to persons suspected of working as straw purchasers on behalf of Mexican drug cartels. The logical question is, why in the world would this such a misguided program be initiated, and who would be held accountable? Another question is, who objected to the Fast and Furious, and why weren't those objections taken seriously? Congressional investigations have found that many firearms dealers actually contacted the ATF and expressed their concerns about who was buying these guns and in whose hands they might end up. Multiple ATF agents have testified that they openly protested their orders to actually let these guns walk across the border into the hands of the cartels when they were told to break off surveillance of these illegally purchased weapons, because they suspected what eventually did happen is that no good would come of Fast and Furious. Not only has Brian Terry lost his life as a result of this misguided program, weapons from the Fast and Furious program have shown up at about 11 different crime scenes here in the United States. So the questions that I have relate to why weren't the voices of people in the field who first raised objections or concerns about this program heard. Another question my constituents in Texas have been asking is, have similar gun walking practices occurred in our state? According to published reports, Houston-based firearms dealer Carter's Country revealed that its store clerks had been ordered to go through with the sale of weapons to suspicious persons who may have been working as straw purchasers for Mexican drug cartels. And some of the weapons purchased from Carter's Country have been recovered at the scene of violent crimes in Mexico. Senator Grassley's investigations have also revealed a possible Texas connection to the February murder of U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Officer Jaime Zapata in Mexico. One of the weapons used to murder Officer Zapata was purchased in Texas in October 2010 and subsequently trafficked to Mexico through Laredo, Texas. And while the suspected weapons traffickers may have been arrested, there are reports that the ATF was aware of these activities and allowed them to continue for far too long. Another question that's being asked by our friends across the border, the government of Mexico, who are fighting these cartels, and many of whom have over the years lost their lives. But our friends in Mexico are asking, why is the administration allowing guns to come into Mexico as part of U.S. government policy? Why is the U.S. government arming drug cartels? According to a report in the Los Angeles Times, one of the victims of Fast and Furious was the brother of Patricia Gonzalez, who at the time was the top state prosecutor in Chihuahua. The L.A. Times also reports that Mexico's Attorney General, Marisela Morales, who's been a good partner to the United States, that she first learned about Fast and Furious from news reports. And as of last month, she said U.S. officials have not briefed her on the operation, nor have there been any apologies for this misguided program. So, Mr. President, questions are being asked on both sides of the border, and they deserve answers. Back in August, I wrote to Attorney General Holder and asked him to promptly disclose the details of any past or present Texas-based gun-walking programs similar to Operation Fast and Furious. Much to my disappointment, I've not received any official response from the Department of Justice nor Attorney General Holder. While disappointing, this stonewalling is not surprising, considering the difficulty that Senator Grassley and Representative Issa have had in their investigation of Operation Fast and Furious. In May 2011, Attorney General Holder told the House Committee on Oversight and Government Reform that he had only learned of Operation Fast and Furious in the past few weeks, to quote him. The evidence now shows that Attorney General Holder had received multiple briefing memos regarding the operation that date back as early as July 2010, much earlier than the few weeks ago he's claimed in May of 2011. It's time for Attorney General Holder to tell Congress precisely what he knew and when he knew it, and to be honest with Congress and the American people about how this happened and who will be held accountable for it. So far, I think the Attorney General's earnest hope is that this will all go away, but it will not go away. My amendment would help ensure that we no longer have to worry about Operation Fast and Furious or similar ill-advised gun-walking operations. This amendment will mandate that no taxpayer money will be spent on programs where law enforcement personnel knowingly caused the transfer of weapons to suspected drug cartel associates with the intent that those law enforcement officials break off the surveillance of those weapons prior to interdicting them. In other words, this amendment is narrowly tailored to prevent future programs like Operation Fast and Furious, while allowing law enforcement the freedom to operate gun trafficking investigations where they are in continuous surveillance of the weapons. This will also allow law enforcement officials to use weapons transfers to low-level straw purchasers as a tool to investigate the chain of command in drug and gun trafficking rings, while simultaneously requiring them to keep their eyes on the weapons at all times so that they can step in and prevent unnecessary and tragic violence. Just over 10 months ago, Border Patrol Agent Brian Terry was murdered by criminal gang members with weapons walked into their hands by the ATF and the Department of Justice. It's my hope that this body has learned from this tragedy and that we will affirmatively act to ensure that nothing like this happens again. My amendment does just that, and I hope my colleagues will join me in supporting it. Mr. President.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maryland.
Mr. President, I rise to comment on the gentleman from Texas's amendment. Mr. Chairman, I am the chair of the subcommittee on Commerce, Justice, and Science, and fund the Bureau of Alcohol and Firearms, so I'm going to comment on the amendment. But before I want to comment on the amendment explicitly, I'd like to compliment the gentleman from Texas, one, raising the issue on the floor, second, his fierce defense of the border, our southwest border, and his devotion to federal law enforcement and always being concerned when we send them in harm's way and where we in any way could have contributed to either their injury or their death. So I think I just compliment you on that. My ranking member, Senator Dave Bailey Hutchinson, also from Texas, has spoken eloquently, diligently, and unflinchingly about the need that we've got to be serious about what's happening on the southwest border. I say this to you, that for those of us who are concerned about our country, we support the efforts to control our border and the growing violence that's occurring there. I believe America's in 4 wars: Iraq, which is winding down, Afghanistan that ultimately will, southwest border, and the cyber war. We have now 2 enduring wars. And I say to the gentleman from Texas, I want to work with you. When I look at what happened with Operation Fast and Furious, I was fast to be furious about the bungled, botched occurrences that occurred. For those who might not be familiar with it, this was the federal law enforcement, by trying to combat illegal gun traffic, allowed guns to knowingly walk into Mexico so we could track what it was doing. It was poorly planned, poorly executed, had flawed leadership, and it was definitely of questionable strategy and value. I would like to work with the senator from Texas with some slight modifications to the bill, some tweaking and more precise definitions, and over the next hour or so, if we could look at it, I'd like to be able to accept your amendment. I think you're onto something. And I'd also like to work with you, your colleague from Texas, those from the Southwest, to get the answers from the Attorney General that you want. You're entitled to those answers. And people at the local level who put local cops on the ground, our version of boots on the ground, should at least have answers from their own government and about what they're doing. Operation Fast and Furious was one of many strategies along the U.S.-Mexico border. In Arizona, targeting illegal gun and drug smuggling. The offshoot of the successful Project Gun Runner, there were teams of ATF agents and investigators that increased our coverage, disrupting firearm trafficking corridors. The Project Gun Runner has been operating since 2006. But Fast and Furious just went too far. It went beyond normal Project Gun Runner strategy. It allowed assault weapons to be sold to suspected straw buyers who transported them to Mexico, and then ATF lost track of the weapons, which was the point of what they were trying to do. Fast and Furious was pulled to an end, but without terrible problems. Now, there's no doubt that ATF has done good work. They seized tens of thousands of guns. There's the whole issue of the allowing of selling guns across the area. But you know what? Hundreds of Mexican citizens have died. Our own valiant law enforcement has died. We've got to do something about it. Now, I understand from the Attorney General that when he heard about it, he did take decisive steps to clean it up. Immediately asked the Department DOJ Inspector General to conduct an investigation examining the facts of what had happened. He made it clear to all federal prosecutors and law enforcement they should never knowingly allow guns to cross the border, longtime Justice Department policy. He changed the leadership at ATF and the U.S. Attorney's Office in Arizona and has complied, he tells me, with congressional requests for thousands of documents. And if you feel you're not getting answers, I'm going to join with you. Again, you deserve those answers. Now, we need to make sure we're giving law enforcement the tools they need. Hopefully we have it in the bill. We'd like to do more. We've got to fight those cartels. Vicious, violent, grim, ghoulish. We've listened to the concerns of our colleagues who've spoken, outspoken. Senator Yu, our colleagues, our two colleagues from Arizona, Kyle and McCain, are well known in your advocacy on this. We've made a major investment in 2009 and another close to $2 billion in this bill. It's $1.9 billion to safeguard our southwest border. So we're putting resources in it. Fast and Furious is ended. We need better leadership. We need better strategy. I would like to work with you on your amendment, and if we could, I think it'd be great if we could just accept it. You know, we've all got to be in this together. The southwest border is America's border. I don't live in the southwest. I live in the northeast. But anything that happens down at your border affects us. And that's the way we need to think about ourselves. We're all Americans. We all need to look out for one another. We need to be able to protect our border, protect those who are defending the border, and make sure we get it right and that we don't contribute to the problem. So I'd sure like to work with you on this.
Mr. President.
Senator from Texas.
I will just take a moment or two to say thank you to the Senator from Maryland for her offer, and I will take you up on that. I know our staff are already exchanging some modest revisions that maintain the general thrust of the amendment and make clear that the Senate will not approve of any funds being used going forward for these sorts of misguided and poorly thought out programs like Operation Fast and Furious. I would ask the Senator's help and take her up on her offer to try to get conclusive and comprehensive answers from the Department of Justice. I know Senator Grassley and Representative Issa feel, and I feel as well, that the Attorney General and the Department could be more forthcoming. And really what it boils down to is a matter of accountability. I think one of the things that drives people crazy about Washington and Congress these days is they feel like things are happening that shouldn't be happening and no one is held accountable. And that is what needs to happen in this program. And I would take you up on your offer, so I appreciate that, and we'll work with you and your staff to see if we can come up with some acceptable language. I would just as a matter of the record, because I think we need, again, from a standpoint of accountability and clearness, the record, I would like to have a roll call vote on my amendment at the appropriate time, but we'll work with you and come up with some acceptable language.
Okay.
I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Maine.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I just want to update my colleagues on an amendment that Senator Udall of Colorado and I, along with several of our colleagues, filed and debated last night. This is the amendment that would prevent the U.S. Department of Agriculture from imposing needless, costly restrictions on the school lunch and the school breakfast programs. We debated this amendment at length last night, so I'm not going to do so again now. But I did want to report on some progress that we're making in achieving a consensus amendment. First, I want to thank the chairman of the subcommittee, Senator Cole, and his staff, who have been very, very helpful to us. I also want to thank the ranking member of the subcommittee, Senator Blunt, and his staff, who have also worked with us. And we've worked with USDA. So this morning, I am filing another amendment with Senator Udall of Colorado that makes a few changes in the amendment. It's very consistent with the intent of the amendment that we debated last night, but it does strike the words "and fruits." And since the intent of our amendment was not to change the requirements on fruit servings, I was happy to suggest that, accept that suggestion from USDA. So I have filed a new amendment. I understand it's going through the clearance process on our side of the aisle, and I hope this is an amendment that we can clear and accept very shortly. But I just wanted to bring my colleagues up to date to thank the two leaders of the subcommittee and to let my colleagues know that we're making great progress. This amendment is going to make a real difference to school districts across the country without in any way impairing the nutritious meals that we want all of our school children to receive. Thank you, Mr. President.
Senator from Wisconsin.
President, I appreciate